Good evening. I come to you tonight, sans mask. On further reflection, it occurred to us that it doesn't really matter whether or not my identity is concealed from you. It doesn't affect the message, and I live a sheltered life. You don't know me. We don't yet know if this is going to be a regular thing. I'm more comfortable behind a mask. But I'm going to give it a shot, so we'll just see how it goes. And tonight I'm going to read you the first part of the first story. It's one of the more serious stories, but it does have a point. It's called The Debt Collector. So let's go ahead. Part 1. Too many keys. He was waiting for her when she walked in the door. She had a large key ring, about the diameter of a tennis ball, and twice as many keys as locks she ever needed to open. The keys jangled chaotically, clearly broadcasting her location, before she even finished climbing the stairwell to her apartment. The door had stuck. It almost always did, no matter how much or how long she protested to her landlord. And this served even further to alert him to her presence. She left the keys in the lock. She had a brown paper bag filled with cleaning products stuffed under her right arm. She had intended to march into the small kitchen off the entryway, plop the bag onto the counter, and then come back and get the keys. It was a plan that often ended with her searching for her keys the following morning, only to find them still hanging in the lock outside the door. He stood with his back against the wall, to the left of the door. Between him and the door was a tall but narrow rack of shelving that tapered near the top. He knew that when she returned to her apartment, he could back up into this space, and if he pressed himself against the stucco wall, she probably wouldn't be able to see him until after she'd come inside completely and closed the door. When he heard her keys, her stomping steps, and her cursing aloud when the door wouldn't open, he did just that. He sucked his chin in for good measure. The door finally burst open, and the last light of the fast-falling evening illuminated the spare living room in a weak flood. She came inside, and the door closed most of the way behind her, but it was kept slightly ajar by the oversized key ring. He watched her for a moment. She had walked a few steps past him in the direction of the kitchen, but now she stopped. She sensed something was off. It was subconscious, for he'd been very careful not to change the location of anything in the apartment while he'd been preparing it. But something was just off, and she noticed. She could feel it, using a sense she couldn't quite put her finger on. Something not quite a smell, but not too far from a smell either. So she stopped. To him, she looked like a squirrel who has just seen a dog, motionless in the moment before it takes flight up a tree. Moving quicker and quieter than any dog, he took 2 steps towards her, knocked the bag out from under her hands, and grabbed her. She didn't know what to think. Her nostrils flared, her eyes widened. She got goosebumps all over her entire body. She felt instantly nauseous, and her forehead had already broken out in a sweat. He had one hand clasped firmly over her mouth, but she tried to scream anyway. She couldn't help it. He pressed his hand over her mouth harder, his other arm wrapped around her torso, pinning her arms to her sides, and said, "I don't want to kill you, but if you don't shut up, I will." His voice seemed strangely calm, like he was ordering food at a Chinese restaurant. She stopped mid-scream, a scream that was muffled beyond the point of being useful anyway, and sobbed a little instead. Her mind went to the mace she had in her dresser, the knife she had in her bathroom, and her dog. Oh God, her dog. Why wasn't he barking? What had this psycho done to him, and more importantly, what was he planning to do to her? Her mind was doing backflips. She had gone from thinking about taking a shower and taking her dog to the park to wondering if she was going to die in the time it took to sneeze. He pulled her towards the front door and said, "Get the keys. Don't try anything." He loosened his grip around her arms and let one slide out. She reached around the edge of the door and jiggled the keys until they came loose. She snaked her hand back inside, and he pushed her roughly against the door so it slammed shut. Keeping her pinned there, he slid the deadbolt into place with his left hand. She dropped the keys onto the linoleum floor. He was still cupping a hand over her mouth, but she mumbled the words, "What do you want?" with a reasonable amount of clarity. Enough that he understood her anyway. He responded in the same measured tone he had used a moment before. "Right now, I want you to shut up. I'm thinking." He looked her up and down in a way that scared her even more than she had been already. He cocked his head to one side and said, "You're shorter than I figured on. Hope that's not a problem." He walked towards her bedroom, grasping her firmly. She heard herself saying, "No, no, no, no," and then he was dragging her, his fingertips pushing deeply into the side of her cheek and hip. She wasn't even really thinking anymore. Her reactions were primal. She knew it was futile, but she'd gone beyond the point of being in control of the situation, either inside or outside of her head. She knew what was coming, or at least she thought she knew. For his part, he really didn't know if she was too short for the restraints he had set up in her bedroom a few hours earlier. If she was, he'd improvise, but everything had gone according to plan up until now, and he found himself dreading the first hiccup